All right, everyone, let's regather, please. For those of you who heard Hira Nabi, her prints are now at the back. And you know that it's for a cause, so please, her prints are there, and please support the cause. It's just one bill in your, maybe for the visitors, it's one bill in your pocket. And I'm sure she'll give a discount to people who need to have a discount. All right. Okay, please, let's get back. You know, I'm being scolded by so many people out there to say that I'm not keeping proper time. So we have to keep proper time in the next panel. Okay? So we have to keep proper time. This means that I've been told to do this after 10 minutes. Okay, so I was trying to avoid it, but we will have to do it. Okay, now, you know, the last panel reveals some of the complexity of this topic of emerging solidarities. It's not really so direct and so simple that we have new emerging solidarities and it's going to be something that will just kickstart us and go into a new realm of time and space and everything works. You can see that in the last panel, which you know, we chose not to break up, but the last panel shows a lot of the complexities of this idea of emerging solidarities, that they're all fraught. They're either underground or they have to be engaging with hegemonies and histories, as well as the fact that actually some of the emerging solidarities are actually with the non-human. And this we completely cannot understand, right? Because we can understand the human interactions and the human solidarities, but what about solidarities with spirits and with the spiritual and with the non-human? It becomes more and more abstract. So, okay, without further ado, we're going to go into the next panel, and we have to time this panel exactly half an hour because we have a dancer who's been waiting for 2 hours. So we have to get this panel of 3 people on the road so that the dancer can dance and we can release them. All right, so we first start with Hitman Gorong.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I will try to make short. So I'll directly go to the slides. The scene takes place in a village where women gather in the center of a stone-paved courtyard. Scattered around the sturdy walls, a handful of old men seated, while a figure dressed in a dark greenish-brown attire and wearing a hat presides from a chair. With black boots and wooden rod in hand, he executes an year of authority. This figure is known as a Rikute, a feared entity identified as a soul devourer. 3 armed men stand guard behind him. On his right, the revered village leader known as Mukhia is seated. A group of teenage boys sit trembling at a short distance, their heads bowed in fear. These occurrences persisted haunts to the soul devourer, at times expected and other times striking without warning, until the British Raj left the subcontinent. Upon hearing news of their impending arrival, villagers from young boys of 14 to middle-aged men who would flee to the jungle, seeking refuge from capture. Unfortunately, not all the women were fortunate enough to have their sons or husbands return home unharmed by the clutches of the soul devourer. For the woman, watching their loved one depart was akin to bidding them farewell for the last time. My father was one of the fortunate ones who managed to escape embarking on an adventurous journey back to our village from Lucknow. He endured a lifetime of trauma. After 2 failed marriages, he married my mother. I was born when he was 57 years old. He relocated with my mother and elder sister to a new small town, forsaking his ancestral land, a decision viewed as a shameful during that time. He passed away burdened with guilt, representing someone who fled from the Great War, so-called Great War. Yet thousands of so-called brave Gorkhas died and disappeared in foreign lands without recognition, whom the colonial empire has projected and promoted as symbols of bravery and capitalized the tragedy. Within a short period of time, Nepal witnessed a series of political movements and struggle for representative democracy, a multi-party system, people's war, and the abolition of monarchy. Individual people, Dalits, marginalized groups, women and gender advocates joined these movements, sacrificing their lives with the hope of achieving positive change and securing their rights and freedom. Unfortunately, these revolutions often were hijacked, developing into power struggles dominated by the Brahmins. A person had joined the People's Liberation Army with dreams and hopes that the revolution will bring change to problematic social, cultural, and economic systems. This sky, these houses made of mud, stone, wood, orange and white clay are still all the same, only that person is missing and his dreams have disappeared along with his sweat in the heat of deserts. Internal and external conflicts such as the continual political instability, a 10 years long people's war, as well as global capitalist forces have fundamentally altered the social fabric of developing countries like Nepal. Carrying aspirations for a better future, each day thousands Nepalese leave the country to join a cheap international labor force, mostly in the Middle East and Malaysia. Simultaneously, internal migration has translocated people from villages to small towns and small towns to cities. Villages are emptying and rapidly losing their social structures. Places like my village have been deserted and the farms left barren. The elderly caretakers watch silently as most able-bodied members of their families live one by one. So I'm sharing here one story I encountered through my connection with hundreds of migrant workers working in Gulf countries and Malaysia from 13 years. In 2010, a friend and I went to Malaysia. During my stay there, I worked at a Chinese Gulf manufacturing factory for 2 years. Despite a major monthly salary of just 450 ringgit, the working conditions were backbreaking. We toiled for 12 to 14 hours per day without receiving any compensation for overtime. Distressingly, the owner will be restored to physical violence if we fail to meet their demands. Sadly, my friend struggled to keep up the fast-packed work, resulting in frequent beatings from the owner. Over the time, relentless abuse took a toll on his mental well-being. He became extremely sensitive to noise, often breaking down to tears at even the slightest disturbance. Realizing his worsened condition, I took it upon myself to arrange for his repatriation to Nepal. Despite his return home, the poor soul never fully recovered from the traumatic experience he had endured. My community has been serving as a Gorkhas for several generations. However, the pattern of migration has now changed. People from every geography and ethnic groups are migrating as a temporary laborers, most of whom hold manual low-paying jobs. Nepal's economy is heavily dependent on the remittance sent by these very workers. Globally, Nepal ranks high in terms of foreign remittance as a percentage of country's GDP. Yet the government has not paid serious attention to the rights of migrant workers, neither has it developed better policies regarding their safety. The laborers, most of whom are young and middle-aged, come from marginalized and underprivileged backgrounds. They leave their families, their homeland, with the dream of pursuing a better life. Sadly, migrant laborers are often subjected to exploitation, abuse, slavery-like conditions, and untimely death are common among migrant workers. Thank you. And I would like to thank Keng Sen and the organizer for having me here. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. Sorry, I didn't prepare as everyone was reading here. I'm not an English speaker, and I'll try somehow to fit in within the 10 minutes. I just took some notes, and I wanted to share with you this series called Congo Far West, Retracing Charles Lemer's Expedition, that I did back in 2010. So as you all know, there are like 54 countries on the African continent that were nearly all invented during the Berlin Conference in 1884 and 1885, known as the Scramble for Africa or the Congo Conference. It's during the conference that the European countries brought the African continent under their control as part of their separate empires. So, talking about the invention, I've been interested in this Congo Far West series on the actions or fictions that were taken in order to create to invent borders. In Congo, for example, we have 9 borders where basically you do find same people living in both countries. Where one it's been a Belgian colony, the other it's been like a Portuguese colony, French colonies, and so on and so on. So my action actually in this series, I was really interested in seeing the fiction behind the invention of these borders. What I did basically, because I was invited at the Tervuren Museum, which is an ethnographic museum in Belgium, where they do have archives related to Congo. And when I was invited there to work with the archives, I decided to follow the Charles Lemer's expedition because it's the one that actually back in 1899 that installed the border between the Katanga region and the Rhodesian region, so it's in the southern part, and it's also the region where I'm from. And the Rhodesia was under the English occupation, and the other part, it was the Belgian one. So I decided to take all the pictures taken by François Michel during the Charles Lemer's expedition, and I went back on same places trying to confront and to find new narratives, but through a more poetic way of dealing with the history and seeing if there are traces and if people do remind about what happened and why those borders are there, still exist, and why we're still calling ourselves Congolese or Zambians or Angolan. So in this series, or the series of pictures that I will show you, are just focused on one element, and from there we can poetically think about the fiction of all this colonial legacy. And that thing and that element, it's basically the geodetic marker that was a reference to sort of situate the borders during the expedition. And not only the geodetic, I also took note of all these messages that were shared between the colonial administrators with the members of the Charles Lemaire expedition. So I'm going to go through the pictures, and we can read some elements. So these are notes, but I would like mostly not only the geodetic marker. Another element, it's really, I wanted to focus on a battle that happened in 1899 that actually was a battle between the chief from Kiamakela, the region is Kiamakela, and Kiamakela was under the chief Muluma Nyema, who didn't want the Belgian occupation, so he resisted, and it ended up into a battle which actually it's been documented by François Michel. So here we are seeing on basically the burning of the village of the Kiamakela's chief. And I came back in 2010, I took the picture of the same place, of the cave, where most of these soldiers were hidden and then burned inside, as you can see in the previous picture, that they are burning the caves where most of the soldiers were hiding, actually. So I came back in 2010, and on the site, it's actually a Tenke Fungurume mining, so it's a mining company who's owning the land. And then here with François, you can see the Kiamakela, the entrance of the Kiamakela's cave. And my picture of the same area, not the same place, but actually with one of the grandson of the 7 survivants from the burning of the caves that happened back in 1899. And here you have, I'll just go back. So here you have some notes where administrators were writing to the expeditionaries, like, the moral effect will be fearsome, but that causes me no joy. And while Chief Muluma Nyema deserved death, the unfortunate victims are to be pitied. I'm going to fit into the 10 minutes, so I'm going to go fast and not reading all. And here I can read the last one. In any case, one may not have the impression that it was due to the lack of generosity that all those poor wretches perished. So basically, it were there were 178 corpses under the cave. And here again, you have the geodetic marker. But then I went in another place that was quite interesting, that the geodetic marker was destroyed by local people in that area because they thought that the Belgians left treasures under those geodetic bones. And here you have a mission camp that was just aside the cave site where there's 178 bodies were burned. And the same place, it's the Tenke Fungurume mining. So what is the Tenke Fungurume mining? I'm going to read it. It's just a basic Wikipedia, research, just to show you like how these information can be at the same time close to us and far, and how they can create a sort of gap. So this is, if you just tap on your Wikipedia, you can find it. So Tenke Fungurume mining is one of the largest copper and cobalt producers in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Construction on the site began in the later part of 2006, and in 2009, TFM produced its first copper. The mine has since become a vital source of income to local communities and the country by way of royalties and taxes, as well as the largest employers in the region. So the ownership, this is where it becomes interesting. So Tenke Fungurume was initially drilled around 1900. And it was then by the state-owned. So Tenke Fungurume mining soil was initiated initially drilled around 1900 by Union Minière, then by state-owned Gécamines, then an Anglo-American joint venture in the 70s, then Adolph London in the 90s, the Phelps Dodge in the US with 57 and 75% share, and the Congolese company Tenke Mining Corp. and Gécamines. And then in 2007, it became a free report with 56% and London 24%. In 2016 and 2017, it became a China molybdenum with 56% and BHR. It's all international companies. And then in 2009, it's 80% property of the China molybdenum. So while they started to do all the extraction, and they came across all the bones that were in the caves, the company decided to bring archaeologists in order to take all these bones and to bring them into the ethnographic and archaeological museum in Congo. But not to exhibit them, but really to put them in the storage in order that they are in the so-called safe place and a legal space, but it's not for people to come and mourn or even remember as they were coming to this same place, kind of remembering and connecting and dealing with the past and thinking about the future, basically. But actually, people are no longer, I mean, especially those from this community, they are no longer able to see the bones or even to reach the cave and even to connect with their past because it's now part of the so-called museum, basically. So here comes the museum concept, a classical museum concept, as Avni have just talked about it, actually, so I don't have much to speak about, because we all know that the classical museum is not representing the reality. It's not connecting people. It's really imposing, again, what it's been imposed as those fictional borders that we still have, even today, and that we're acting as if it's normal, basically. So, seeing all this, I would like to conclude by just saying that, yeah, I mean, the Belgian as a nation, it started in 1830, and 55 years after, they had their first colony, which is also a nation now. So, if we start to think about nations and its toxic legacies, I think we need to rethink the future, and we need to question this notion of nation, basically. And seeing also the failure of democracy and with what is going on all over the world. Because we were like, during the Second World, we went into this so-called Cold War, where we had socialists on one side and liberal on the other side. And then came the fall of the Berlin, and suddenly we started to talk about democracy. And now, seeing that people are no longer able to express themselves, and we understood that there's no longer democracy, so we need to think the future, because it's no longer democracy, so we need to rethink as human being. And I'm talking to you not as a Congolese, not as a Belgian, but I'm talking to you as a human being. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be amidst you. My gratitude to the Prince Claus Fund, also to everybody at the Geoffrey Bawa Trust for enabling this gathering, to the technical team, who are friends as well, collaborators. Thank you. Moving to the Netherlands in 2010, the Prince Claus Fund was actually one of the few organizations that had already fostered vivid relationships with artist-led initiatives and pluridisciplinary platforms in what Shahidul might recognize as the majority world. This made being in the Netherlands less lonely. So it is beautiful today to witness a cross-generation of cultural practitioners, especially also the seed grantees from across the region, artists who are coming from the north and east of Sri Lanka especially, to be together in this room. Since we are knee-deep in preparations for the 8th edition of Colombo Scope, excuse me for sharing from this ongoing quest, because we open in just over a month, and I hope that this endeavor will be a sort of series of snapshots really from a dense weave of creative acts. I'm joined in this pursuit with Hitman Gurung, Shalasha Rajbandari, who have spoken today, as well as Sarkar Pratik. So we have a lot to co-make together until we meet again in January. As someone birthed in India, entering into society as an imperfect Zoroastrian, and then striving for South Asianness as a border-defying way to be, to exist, with all of the follies, all of the lack, all of the malice of what South Asia as a bordered entity implies on our minds and our bodies. Cartographic failure is what I remain preoccupied with. And this emerging way in which South Asianness is constantly defying the regimes of nationalism, militarism, and partitioned isolation. Therefore, mapping this island is something that became a really pivotal exercise, mapping this island with artists. This is Hema Shironi's hand-stitched microcosms that map the island over centuries. Its many names are uttered, moving from imperial and aristocratic cartographic pursuits to the rise of majoritarianism and sectarian fissures, to Colombo, understood as an outsourced port city. A crossroad for maritime travelers, colonialists of all stripes, kingmakers who exist as parliamentarians, where migration ensues at all costs, at all odds. Despite it still being considered a jewel in the Indian Ocean, what does it mean then to imagine ourselves in our South Asianness as citizens of water, as citizens of folly? In this, we're also sort of looking at the artist's own uprooting and displacement, having lost and fled many homes. And it is this internal dislocation as well that we have been thinking about as a platform. Colombo Scope exists as an interdisciplinary arts festival, but more importantly, as a learning platform concerned with economies of scale and redistribution. It is envisioned as a vital artistic meeting point and a space in which we gather, often unseen. The Forest School is a series of residential workshops which we have been doing with different partners. It is when artists converge together from across the island for online and in-person sessions of unlearning, for thinking about what is outside of curriculums. We've already spoken about the biopolitical regime of the university and its lacks. And so, how to get rid of the blinkered misconceptions around different parts of the island. So really, this internal dislocation, this internal misinformation, and really get to see each other, despite the fact that being functional in highly unequal cultural economies is no joke. Thava Tajendran's earth art and poetry in Laparello form that you see displayed here was a structure that was accompanied in a neighboring display by zines from the sister library from Bombay. These were shown as part of the festival's reading room, Reading in Tongues, inspired by Gloria Anzaldua's Letter to Third World Women Writers. Later, this same structure blooms as a succulent garden. We don't posture in the trite vocabulary of upcycling, but rather the festival community generates ways to act on fundamental principles of accompanying raw material and services of labor across different constellations, as well as temporalities, in changing states of production from end to end. There cannot be climate justice without food sovereignty, and today, with seeing the rise of alarming levels of malnutrition and food scarcity in Sri Lanka, but simultaneously in many parts of the world, this documentary, Abundance, was produced for the 2017 edition, Re-Evolution, curated by Mendika van der Poten with Shanika Pereira. And it gave an in-depth inquiry into traditional agricultural systems in Sri Lanka, analog forestry, being in dialogue with food growers at the village level, intermediaries as well, and thinking about the impact of mechanization of the food cycle, of heirloom seeds and fertilizer use, all still issues that were brought up as well during the ongoing political and economic crisis of the island. How to address ecological grief in a country that has been decades, where there has been decades of civil war, massacres, and mass displacement that remains an open-ended inquiry. T. Vinoja composes abstract renditions marked by entwined aspects of vulnerability, annihilation, nightmares and vigil, waiting and agitation. War injuries and disabilities arising from landmines, hazardous refuge in bunkers, and how the afterlives of ammunition shapeshift inside living bodies. In a sense, these are environmental portraits conveying what even forensic reports fall short of. They confront the viewer with multiple frontiers where ethnic discord, linguistic hegemony, and embattled perspectives on majoritarian politics provide only a fractured view of a liberation attempt, but of the ravaging, moreover, of human lives and ecologies. Pushpakantan Pakyaraja, an artist, one of many with whom we have long-drawn relations, an artist we worked with in 2015, continuing to be informed by making work around intergenerational trauma and post-war mourning, recognizing geologic memory, more than human witnesses, and land itself as an agent of historiography. This is a glimpse of his work that will be exhibited at Way of the Forest. Forests of the Northern Peninsula, drylands in the region, are witnesses, and I'm aware I'm talking in front of many of you who know way more than me, recognizing that, are witnesses of historical violence and resistance in the suite of sculptures by Inkaran. Having observed the changing contours of the Vani from dawn to dusk and in the pitch of darkness, Inkaran recalls these vast forest lands as inscribed in Tamil memory cultures. Deploying rusty car and motorcycle parts, used clothing, CDs, sacred threads, and carved wood. These I see as an archaeology of media and of sensory experience that is visceral. Drawing on visions of his forced flight and search for safe passage at the height of civil war from Mannar to Mulivalkal, the artist recalls the physical contours of the landscape. He recalls, too, the touch of rough gravel paths, as well as the smell of the forest. Sami has already spoken about mining and militarism and how these move together in the world. Extractivism and resource elimination are a form of linear violence. They are the continuum that is passed on from one generation to the next, from Congo to India to Nigeria to Namibia. Odomong Nkanga is an artist I've been working with for many years. She is someone we're very excited to bring to the island, to think with her practice, as one that is absorbed with studying processes of wounding and restorative care of the Earth system. This includes adopting a circular economy as part of her artistic living. It means for her building infrastructure in Greece, taking up agriculture as an act of land restoration in her home in Nigeria. The writer, Teju Cole, notes, in response to Otterboung's practice, the fissuring and fracturing of the earth are deconstructive processes. But beyond them lies facture, construction. We mine and we build. Nkanga elaborates on mineralized terrains as part of the technological apparatus of our everyday aesthetics, of warfare, of enslaved labor, and as part of our beauty protocols. In their glimmer, rupture, and perpetual enticement, even the rise of necropolitical toxicity doesn't beat the thirst. With several artists at the festival, and here I'm recognizing the work as well of Shilasha and Hitman, the forest is essentially also accessed and addressed with respect through its sacred potential as a ground for medicinal return, protected by jinns and hybrid deities, legends around exile, and origin stories that take birth in the subtropical woods, in mountains ravaged by colonial plantations, and in ancient forests where those who are its caretakers are eventually denied entry through it becoming a nationalized space as so-called parks, as so-called sanctuaries, when the word sanctuary itself loses its meaning. We see these, therefore, these spaces as spaces of pedagogy, spaces of fugitivity, spaces of replenishment. Let us think of our region not only through the lens of aesthetic solidarities, but moreover, the lens of economics. The vicious grip of late capitalism and migrant labor, as has been addressed. This brings me as well to practices like Hira Nabi's and Ranjit Kadalgaonkar, who have presented their work in Colombo Scope, addressing South Asia's shipbreaking yards, among the largest in the world, and unfolding geopolitics of the Indian Ocean world through port infrastructure, global debt, and militarization. Through pandemic, one of the things that we were unable to do, and that was most painful, is to have these kind of moments of gathering, of sharing food, of taking pleasure in what artists produce, which includes meals. So the artist and research architect duo Cooking Sections, as part of their Klima War project, presented a performative dinner installation on mangroves and mud flats at Colombo Scope's Sea Change edition. This is another instance of how the festival remains a space for sensorial making and cohabitation. Cooking Sections were paying attention to the environmental characteristics of wetlands, of climate change-induced precarities around this coastline, as well as the impact of offshore fish farming and high-pressure trade in aquaculture. Artists take us beyond linguistic representation into the plenitude of the forest as a lexicon. Many of the artists that we are working with often are missing in action. They basically go offline, they go into these canopied terrains, they go into the mountains, they go near the waterfalls, they go to their villages. We lose them, they come back, they make work in situations which continue to ensure that almost every artist, Sri Lankan artist in this room, is not able to purely be an artist, but has to take up at least one, if not two other jobs. And it is with that reality that we take responsibility for what it means to exist as a platform, while we ourselves continue to do our various other roles and wear many hats as cultural organizers. I acknowledge, therefore, concluding, the disorder of things, quoting Jack Halberstam's Wild Things, The Disorder of Desire, dark and deep places of the wild that move away from the episteme of an order of things, elaborated on through colonial travel, possession, and annihilation. These are the privileges. These are the privileges that ensure that we await ruination. To recognize, therefore, untamed ecologies as the other side of classification and refute the violence of total legibility. Let us enliven an aesthetics of bewilderment. Let us become lost in space and time in order for unknowing, unthinking, and unbecoming to take hold, as we are living in the ruins of other worlds and their visions of the future. Thank you.
Krishna. Hey Krishna.
Hi everyone. Good evening. I'm sorry. I need a little bit breathe. Okay, so nice to see you here. My name is Adushan, so I'm basically from Batticalow. Now I am living in Jaffna for my bachelor degree in Bharatanatyam, specially. I'm a queer artist, and I working when I was 14, so until now I'm 26, I started to activism for rising voice for queer community, especially. So I'm a founder of Rainbow Art Festival. So that is the first queer artist platform. So I did this year. So I hope this festival is going annual year. So next year also it will be happen. So it's more days. And I'm a Tamil-speaking queer activist especially. So I'm proud to be I'm a queer community because in Sri Lanka, this is a marginalized, I know. But even in our community, we are not marginalized. We are same, we need respect. So give respect to them from your heart. So that's only queer communities need. So thank you.
Hola, my name is Carla Fernandez. I am a Mexican fashion designer. And our Casa de Moda, our fashion house, creates new designs in collaboration with more than 160 artisans in 15 different states. I have a terrible cold, so I hope my voice keeps going. I live in a country where 68 different indigenous languages are spoken. I grew up in the 80s, where the Mexican government was always looking to the north, always looking to the United States. They wanted Mexico to be competitive, to mass produce, to eat hamburgers instead of tacos, to wear jeans instead of hand-embroidered huipiles. I grew up in a time where a bus or a plane ticket to the US was much cheaper than to travel to our own country. My family history gave me the opportunity to know Mexico from north to south, and I could admire the sublime indigenous clothing of my country, a true haute couture that was invisible for most of the Mexicans. At the age of 12, I started collecting few pieces and made my own style that later will become my profession. From a very early age, I was fascinated by the power of clothing. My school teacher will forbid me to dress in a colorful way and layers, mainly mixing traditional textiles with the fashion trend of the moment. That is how I discovered the power of what we use, and the prohibitions became part of the way that I express myself. At a very early age, I decided I wanted to be a fashion designer. But at that time, I just heard every single day that Mexico did not have fashion. That if I wanted to be successful, I will have to travel to the trending capitals, buy clothes, copy them, and then produce them outside of Mexico for cheaper costs. Tired of being told no, 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 and hearing that we could not succeed in making hand fashion together with Mexican artisans, I had to learn to unlearn. And that is how our Casa de Moda started 20 years ago, and 30 of making research. We had to learn that tradition is static, because it's not. In Mexico, high fashion is made in the mountains, the deserts, and the jungles. We make fashion alongside with the people whose roots are in the earth from which they sustain themselves. In order to create new designs, we also had to unlearn the use of Western patterning. Artisans wanted to please the tourist market, creating designs that will be more fitted to the body. This foreign method was not successful, as the traditional textiles are not compatible with this couture system. In order to have a tailored silhouette, textile artisans around Mexico were cutting their handmade fabrics with scissors, placing buttons, zippers, and other elements that destroy the garment, ending in a bad design with very poor quality. We understood we needed to get back to the origin methodology and use the DNA of indigenous clothing that is the result of joining together squares and rectangular panels. It's a unique textile origami that uses two figures as the base to construct any other geometrical form. This traditional way of making clothing applied as a design system will free the artisan to use external methodologies that do not adapt to their fabric, and will give also total creative freedom to attend a foreign market, creating innovation departing from their own tradition. We also had to unlearn that fashion is ephemeral, because it is not. The main purpose of our Casa de Moda is to demonstrate that there is not only one fashion system. There are plenty around the world, but we're being brainwashed that fashion has to be ephemeral. Clothes in the communities are made slowly and woven to be treasured. Garments are an open book that tell the story of the weaver and their community. This way of making clothing around the world in the indigenous communities is telling us the following: death to planned obsolescence, which renders expandable all it draws into the abyss of waste. We need to understand that the best design is not that which disintegrates, but that which remains. We want our clothes to last so their whispers will be heard by other generations. Fashion is not ephemeral, neither is our planet, nor our relationships. New solidarities. When we travel Mexico with our mobile design lab, more than anything, we see the opportunity to learn and the emergence of work done together. Our clothes tell the stories of Mexico. To understand the complexity and beauty, we must make visible the artisan techniques that bring them to life. When visually understanding the complexity of these techniques, some of them as 3,000 years old, it is easy to understand their cultural value. For our fashion house, it's important to document, exhibit, create opportunities for artisans to show and teach their work in Mexico and around the world. Now we have an exhibition in Paris where Mexican artisans are in dialogue with French artisanal houses. These mirror collaborations are exceptional. The dialogue and workshops that are being made once again demonstrate that handmade processes are the true sustainable solution that has always been there. We need to understand that artisan processes require time to think, time to learn, time to transform and to transcend. It is time to go back to the origins. It is time for the indigenous time. We all should be learning the capacity artisans have to transform materials into sustenance as a key element in a way of life consummated with nature, in which rituals, worldviews, and science are intertwined. Fashion as resistance. Mexico's most renowned fashionista was and still is Frida Kahlo. She understood fashion as resistance. She would dress as a man to address gender issues, as a Maoist using clothes as a political statement, and dress herself with different indigenous clothing, referring to beauty and elegance as a cultural statement. even though she was not indigenous. We have to learn that fashion is banal. Textiles are our lingua franca. Text, textile, have the same root. We read each other as an open book through what we choose to wear. That is why we also use clothes to make awareness for different political causes like women's rights. We have worked with Marea Verde and made performances with Pussy Riot to demand legal abortion in my country. Fashion as art is powerful, and I'm glad to say that thanks to millions of women and many artists around the country, finally, just 2 months ago, abortion has become legal in Mexico. Another cause we're helping to make more visible is the nuclear disarmament. Mexico has a law that forbids nuclear weapons and has been signed by many different countries. Together with artist Pedro Reyes, we're trying to help scientist organizations to spread the word and come with artistic solutions to fight for peace. To be original is to go back to the origin. I want to finish with the following reflection. In the mountains, an artisan harvests cotton, collects 7 branches with which to make a backstrap loom, and sits to make a panel of fabric. If tomorrow the petroleum supplies are depleted, if there is no electricity or internet, and the industry is paralyzed, she wills to do what she does. She will continue making her own clothes, growing her own food, and building her own home. So we pose the question, who should be learning from whom? The future is handmade.
Okay, I'm going to put a timer to keep track of my time. Hopefully that works. And I apologize if I start speaking very slowly at some moments, because I tend to sometimes speak slow. So today I'm going to be talking about journalism, storytelling, about the 90s a bit, and about Kosovo. But in order to begin, I would like to share with you, you play it? A trailer of a personal documentary film that I worked on a few years ago. Can you just turn it up a bit?
Janë ndërtu muret, ndarëse, brenda objektit, janë ndërtu e muret që mos me pas kontakt fizik.
Gjatë pushimit, që kemi tana, kemi me tregun një pra...
Kur fillon të mësimi, mund të ndëgjoje eventualisht dike në bërë, do një zonë, do një tingë, kur gjë tjetër. Që e qëtësi shumë e më. Thuse e kam ditë që po punohet, thuse e kam ditë që duhet të punohet. Thuse ka pas dikun parolë qëtësi se këtu është shkull.
So basically, this is a documentary film project I worked on a few years back. And I wanted to share it with you because I think it can give you a bit of a glimpse of the years in which I believe that I was very much formed in the 90s. I went to school in those houses, and my house at one point also became a classroom for me and my classmates. Because when Yugoslavia started to fall apart and when Milosevic started his nationalistic campaign that would lead to ethnic cleansing throughout the region, what was happening in Kosovo, it was basically an apartheid. Albanians were expelled from public life, And actually, through solidarity, they managed to create an entire parallel system of political, cultural, and economic survival. And for me, growing up during the 90s in Kosovo, it was solidarity that I always saw around me. Fast forward almost 2 decades later, and finally, by 2008, this ultimate political project of Kosovo to become an independent country came to be true. And the way that it was chosen to be kind of announced to the world, it was through this symbol, which was called a newborn. And at the time, some also saw it as some kind of novel and contemporary expression of Kosovo's national imagery, but for a lot of people, including myself, it was a problematic reading, because newborn, in a lot of ways, also reproduced this idea that Kosovo is an infant, so then it ends up also being produced into practice, where you see yourself as a child, and you're also, you're treated as a child, and in essence, you need to be educated as a child. And this unequal power relation is something that I think a lot of people, myself, and throughout my generation, have faced not only with the international community, who since the end of the war in '99 has had a lot of executive decision-making power for the country, but it also ended up translating to some extent also with a relation with the new political classes, the new Albanian political classes in Kosovo. So it was really within this context, post-2008, post-independence, that Kosovo 2.0, the magazine which I run, was established. These are two of the covers of the magazine. It's a theme print magazine. We started the collection back in 2011, exploring the concept of image, and we ended the collection of 10 issues going back to the 90s, going back to when we were formed. And when we were working particularly on image, it was with this that we wanted to criticize image, because we noticed that there was a lot of preoccupation within our society as well with how the rest of the world sees us, which came, as I mentioned earlier, both as a result of the way international development had been implemented in Kosovo, but also as a result of the fact that there was still a lot of non-recognition and rejection of Kosovo as a state in the global political scene. So people were very much preoccupied with how the rest of the world sees us, so we took it and wanted to twist it the other way around and to say that we should actually be having more conversation about how we see ourselves, because there's nothing also wrong with seeing your weaknesses, but there's something special when you notice them on your own. So this was really the journey of how we started the print magazine. Over the years, we also run an online platform, an online magazine, which initially started as a blogging platform to create a space for a different kind of storytelling and a different kind of sharing of voices and of perspectives within Kosovo, but also the wider region of the Balkans. And from the beginning, our journalism was really, I think, driven by this belief and assertion and agency that history is something that belongs to all of us. And we were particularly keen on looking at what are those experiences and voices that tend to be too marginalized, and in that sense to also challenge ideas of marginality. So this is just to give you an idea a bit of the online magazine, where we do a lot of long-form, one-on-ones, perspectives, documentaries, and whatnot. But I would like to go again back to the magazine and kind of talk about journalism and storytelling also through some of the themes that we decided to focus on through our magazines, and migration being one of them. Because I think Kosovo is very small, so it's 2 million people. So it's like you can consider it like a neighborhood of Berlin. But I think a lot of being also sometimes from this very small place and having gone through particularly having gone through the 80s and the 90s through the oppressive regime, I think gave us something particular in also how we witnessed and how we understood struggles for justice and for equality taking place elsewhere. So we've always been very much interested in looking at what is the critique that we provide within our own context, within our own region, but also how do we make sure that what we have gone through and what we have learned throughout time, we're also applying to stories and also experiences happening elsewhere. And I think migration was definitely one of those, because in Kosovo, the experience with migration has really gone through the 70s and 80s. During Yugoslavia, there was worker agreements between Yugoslavia and Switzerland. In the 90s, there was political asylum seekers. In 99, there was refugees. So we had this recent history of different kind of migration experiences. And when the so-called migration crisis was happening in Europe, we remembered our own stories, or the stories that were told around us, and then we made sure that we were actually talking about what was happening to people that were trying to get into Europe. So people from Syria, from Iraq, and passing through the fortress of Europe. Because being from Kosovo is not necessarily that we belong, according to Europe, that we belong in Europe. According to Europe, we're still kind of a periphery of a periphery, and we ourselves continue to be denied freedom of travel within Europe. So in fact, from all the countries in the region, Kosovo is the only one that still doesn't have freedom of movement, so within the European continent. And we've been following this Fortress Europe experience for people, whether for ourselves or for others trying to enter Europe, what it's meant. And back in 2011, when all of the countries in the region, for example, were granted freedom of movement, we did an article and just like collecting people's experiences dealing with the EU visa regime. And almost a decade later, we started this project of just collecting people's like periods of visa, and this is just a collection of 3 people and all the different timelines of visas that they were issued in their passports, because sometimes I feel like we tend to also just forget the importance of paying attention to details like this, because we treat a visa as something that you get on a paper, but when you start collecting the data, you just see the obscurity of it, of it all. Public space is another issue, and I think I would largely place a lot of our journalism in this frame of the public sphere and the public space, and who has access to it and who doesn't. And while we've done that, I think we've always been attuned to also looking at what are other stories that are happening elsewhere, because we're so much trained, I believe, sometimes to think about things within this context of our own borders, of our own regions, and our own experiences, that we tend to forget that there's similar struggles for justice happening elsewhere. And this has been something that has followed our work from the very beginning, checking the time. And I think ultimately, I would bring it all back to the sex issue, which is one of the most significant moments of our journalistic endeavor, where we very directly challenged the concept of public sphere within Kosovo itself, because in this magazine issue, we really wanted to challenge rigid and exclusionary understandings of gender, of gender identity, gender roles, and sexual orientation. And we talked about the LGBTI community in Kosovo. And there was attempts to regulate the public sphere. So there was attempts by groups of hooligans and extremists who wanted to control what can be said and who can exist in the public sphere. So in 2012, we were attacked by a group of almost 200 men at the launch of the event. But 10 years later, we gathered at the same place by 2022 and continued the discussion again. And what is particularly beautiful in this is because due to the attack, actually, we contributed to breaking down this culture of silence and opening up the discussion. And since then, there's been there's been 6 or 8 pride parades that have been held in the streets of Pristina. There's been improved legislation and whatnot. So it really just shows so sometimes I believe you need that kind of moment where even if violence occurs, at least it will trigger a discussion that otherwise was just not happening. It was just completely absent from the public sphere. All the time, I think what's very important, I'm coming to the end, I think what's very important for us is also just bringing people together, because I think we've become so much accustomed to talk, or like trained in a way to talk about this right to freedom of expression and right to freedom of speech, and sometimes we forget that we also have the right to be heard and the right to be listened to. And this is what we try to do with a lot of our public events, just to gather people and to make sure that our content does not just end on paper or online, but that it continues to be a source of provoking conversation. And which brings me to the last slide. This is a special edition of the magazine that we did on hope. And when we chose hope, it was released in 2020. We were to some extent also aware that hope is very idealistic, and it can also sound like as a naive sentiment to hold, because for as much as hope offers this prospect of change, it also just prolongs the present. So in that sense, hope can be dangerous. So we decided that we want to embrace hope, but we're going to mix it with anger. And what that meant was that through that we're going to be challenging the ways in which we can use our journalism to create this fearless critique and to bring stories of individual, communal, and societal struggle to the fore. So we envision hope through the power of journalistic dissent. And ultimately, I think for us, it all comes back to this quote that the paradox of democracy is that the best way to defend it is to attack it. And earlier somebody said that, and I agree that democracy is in crisis, but I think one of the many reasons that it is in crisis is because we have forgotten to also attack it so that it becomes better for everyone. Thank you.
So I cut my talk by 2 minutes. And I don't know whether I need to cut it by more. But the good news is that I'm almost the last one. There's still one person behind me. And Ibrahim Mahama is phenomenal. So bear with me. Believing in a livable present and future for all demands recognizing that agency, the capacity to make choices and enact change, is unevenly distributed. NGOs provide vital, tangible responses to material problems. Art and culture can support these efforts by recognizing, fostering, and prioritizing the agency of individuals, communities, and different publics. By definition, agency is specific to individuals and contexts. Yet, we must also recognize the interconnectedness of global struggles. Our work must be attentive to the whole life of a person, situation, or community, yet it does not reside in isolation. A holistic encounter considers the multitude of social, political, and environmental factors that constrain and shape agency. My research and curatorial work is indebted to artists who articulate ecological crises. Their practice makes tangible the local and material realities of the environmental crisis. This is a way to counter the abstraction of science, policy, and statistics. The first project I worked on dedicated to ecological crisis was the 2020 edition of 21 Jeddah Arts entitled Ayyatuha al-Ard, I Love You Urgently, meaning Earth, I love you urgently. This was the first time an exhibition in Saudi Arabia engaged with the climate question, quite surprisingly, something the country holds special responsibility and must address. For the first time, many of these Saudi artists confronted questions of the climate emergency within their own specific context. We might say that such work lies at the intersection of art and climate, but an intersection is an overlap, and this sense of connection is complicated in two ways. First, ecological crisis is both product and parent of numerous catastrophes. It cannot be taken as separate from other systems. Second, these artists are not merely translating ideas from one discourse or context to another. Instead of translate, the word articulate is vital here. It has two meanings. It's something spoken and also something that has two parts connected and which lifts and transfers powers. Artists can articulate ecological crisis by leveraging the power of art to lift urgent voices, issues, and truth. Pivoting from aesthetics, ethics, and politics, and back again, is the articulation of conditions and radical ideas and responses. Artists are able to shift scale from a local, present context to a collective and historic one, and back again. I want to use two examples. This is Almanak, You Will Be Missed, by Ala Tarabzouni and Fahad Ben Naif. It archives and documents the history of a cement factory in Riyadh neighborhood and the community, human and ecological, that grew around it. The indexing of artifacts presents the whole ecology of the place, from detritus and rubbish to plants. Everything is coated in the fine dust of the factory, portraying a strong identity of the neighborhood and how it was intertwined with its industry. In this work, Ala and Fahad focus on the interdependence of everything in the area, for better or worse. This poses a question. How can we frame a definition of ecological art relevant to a specific context? Like extractivist or colonial histories, ecological emergency is the inherent condition of our reality. Sometimes speaking to ecologies necessitates recognizing complexity, as in the sense of mourning for a factory, which in other contexts might have appeared detrimental. This factory has disappeared. 3 generations of people living in proximity of this factory have mourned its disappearance. In contrast, another work from another context related to a cement factory shows how communities have their right to a livable environment stripped away from them in brutal and drastic ways. Muhammad Mahdi has documented Wadi al-Qamar, meaning Moon Valley, a neighborhood of Alexandria with 60,000 residents. His photographic series, Moon Dust, shows life under a constant cloud of toxic dust emitted by Alexandria Portland cement factory, which was built and subsequently enlarged within their settlement. Where Ala and Fahad has taken a historical look, these documentary photographs focus on individuals' present realities. Both works recognize historical conditions that inform the entirety of lives. Though the contexts share much, they are different, and the responses also take different approaches. The entangled relationship between industrial and colonial legacy and the climate is often misunderstood. In his 2015 book, The Conflict Shoreline, architect, activist, and theorist Eyal Weizman offers an alternative approach to the climate emergency and its origins. Of the argument made in the book, he says, and I quote, "Even the most militant environmentalists still regard climate change as the collateral of history, the unintended byproduct of industrial development, trade, and transport, whereas I see it as the intention, the very tellus of the colonial project." Ecological thought is relational. It understands an individual or group in relation to the environment and others. Vivian Sansour's Palestinian Heirloom Seed Library is based in Batir in the West Bank, Palestine. As in Ala and Fahad's indexical approach to the cement factory, this is a project that archives and preserves. The project finds and reintroduces threatened crop varieties and collects stories. Stories being very tangible examples of articulation. Alongside the archive of seeds, Sansour also records traditional farming practices in collaboration with local communities. On visiting the library, academic Pelentan commented, and I'm quoting, "Saving and sharing seeds for cultivation has impact beyond feeding human-centric needs. It also works toward preserving biodiversity and ancestral heritages that are under threat from colonial and structural violence. Uncovering and preserving seed stories is also about creating an infrastructure of seeds that's a form of decolonization. The work fights against the ongoing settler colonialism that continuously destroys and erases the ancestral knowledge of the indigenous communities tied to that natural landscape." End of quote. Ecological thought seeks to challenge anthropocentric views, become more relational, and attune to different time frames, legacies, and subjectivities. This is done to benefit the environment and the well-being of individuals and communities. We must work against and think out of histories of control and exploitation. How we speak of and connect to nature matters. The environmental emergency cannot be encountered or countered without finding ways to relate to it on an individual and collective level. As such, ideas of agency are fundamental. Artists articulate not only by speaking about ecological crisis, they also redirect flows. That which cannot be easily grasped or appreciated becomes comprehensible. Art can leverage these forces to make history and systematic issues apparent, then to imagine the world otherwise. So this question of agency is acute in times of war. What happens in a systematic, continued way exacerbated by conflict. Dr. Ali Kadri, a senior fellow at the Laboratory for Advanced Research on the Global Economy at London School of Economics, argues that war is foundational to the forms of capitalist accommodation, which decimates the environment as it allows cheap access to resources, labor, and land. Wars shift power relations between classes and nations, bringing down costs and facilitating extraction and exploitation. Violence and displacement provide cheap nature for capital. He theorizes the concept of waste inherent to capitalist accumulation. Here, waste means both the wasting of human life and of nature. Hundreds of millions have died prematurely due to colonialism, war, and poverty amid abundance. On a journey along the borders of Jordan, Nadia Seiso documented the aftermath of conflict and colonialism. Infertile Crescent, her series from 2015 to 2019, shows how geographical turmoil broke the bond between people and land. The photographs trace man-made borders, but she reads nature's indicators, such as water resources, to witness history and its outcomes. Ali Kadri links extractivist processes to the destruction of social nature, meaning in order to take resources, there is an assault on human beings and their subjectivity. Capitalistic forces, whether war or other kinds of violence, beat populations into submission, both ideologically and materially. In 2020, I worked with the Prince Claus Fund and the Goethe Institute on a project, on a platform entitled Take Me to the River, that was the outcome of 15 interdisciplinary projects from the 2018 and 2019 program, Cultural and Artistic Responses to Environmental Change. The work brought together, the work that were brought together confront ideas of articulated agency, attentive to the cultural and ideological subjectivities of people and environments. The first is about platforms and scope for articulation, how artists can work with communities to develop the skills and knowledge to use available outlets to tell stories to as large as an audience as possible. Mija Villejo worked with the Quechua people of Sarayaku in the Ecuadorian Amazon as part of their fight against oil extraction through various media, including web documentary, book, exhibition, and podcast. The project foregrounded the Quechua people's fusion of ancestral indigenous knowledge and contemporary technology like satellite communication and social media. Also connecting local fights to global systems and infrastructures is the Residencias Walden project. This project brought together Colombian filmmakers documenting the fight for legal recognition of the Atrato River as a subject with rights. I'm echoing here also Pooja's Right of Nature presentation. What is interesting here is that an environmental struggle fully focused on the specifics of the local reality, connected effectively with and uses the international frameworks of law. The resulting documentary films portray the Atrato River's beauty and distress and shows how the idea of legal personhood, something seemingly bureaucratic or generic, in fact, empowered local communities and ecosystem. I want to finish with this idea from Elizabeth Alexander. Art is where and how we speak to each other in tongues audible when official language fails. It is not where we escape words' ills, but rather one place we come to make sense of them. Quoted this week by the Institute of International Visual Arts in London, home of the Stuart Hall Library, it shows how actions of care from art institutions can also necessitate the refusal of closed statements or answers. Eneva started their refused silence, but did not do so with their own perspectives. Instead, they offered collective space for collective breath, providing resources and their building for those wishing to witness, discuss, and mourn. For cultural organizations, agency is also about acting beyond statements and petitions. To recognize the agency of others demand acting with humbleness. So the role of art institutions and the curator is to make space for articulation, as both speech and transfer. Creating space is a question of agency. In this openness, I finish with a few questions. If people's ability to act is restricted by interconnected systems of injustice, would providing more freedom and opportunity involve the creation of real spaces for action? Instead of offering models, make space for others to formulate their own? Instead of leading, listening? Thank you.
Is it because I'm the last person? That's the clap. Thank you very much, Prince Claus Fund, and then Keng Sen for inviting me. I tried to make this snappy. I had wanted to talk about the idea of the gift and the idea of repair. In Ghana, is there a pointer with this? This? Okay. Okay. Sorry. So this is my studio in Ghana, in the north of Ghana where I was born, in the northern part of Ghana. It's called Red Clay, and it's very deliberate the way that it's designed. I've been interested in the history of the railway for quite a long time, ever since I was a student doing my master's degree. I really wanted to work with it with regards to thinking about the historical form and what it's produced over time. You know, in Ghana, the railway was built in the late 1800s, early 20th century. A lot of the labor that was used in building it were actually young men and women who were taken from the north, post-slavery, to the south to build the railway, because Ghana was called the Gold Coast at the time, and the Northern Territory wasn't part of it. So I was very much interested in how these technological forms and others which were built actually to extract, and the labor that was extracted together with it. Even these technological forms never reached the north. So the image that you see on the screen is the first time that, for instance, a railway line has existed in this part of the world. So I was very much interested in how the idea of the line actually almost acts as some kind of a stitch or some kind of a scar or repair within a landscape like this, which is somehow secluded in a village out of the city. So you can see on the screen the images of like men carrying railway lines, things like that. So this early 20th century, the idea of using this kind of extractive labor in order to be able to build this system that never really even went up north to these places where the labor was coming from. So basically as an artist, because I'm also interested in how we're able to take the failures of history and how we're able to reconvert that for another generation. One, from a material point of view, and second, also from a more ideological point of view. So in my studio now, you'll find that there's a railway line that acts as a classroom that does many different things. And kids, like most of the work that I do, actually focus on the experiences of young people. So kids actually experiencing it from a different perspective. Because normally you can't go and stand on a railway line, you'll be hit by a train. But the idea that in an artist's studio, a place of experimentation and all that, it opens up these possibilities which normally would not be possible. So I'm really interested in how the gap of century between this and through arts and culture, we're able to open up this form. But again, it's not just about the idea of building, but it's also this idea of, because as an artist, I always say that you're either an archaeologist or some kind of a time traveler. But it's also important that when we are building, as we work with a lot of school kids, it's important for them to witness what we do. So for instance, a classroom session could literally be inviting a school to come and witness the building of a railway line. No one would ever invite you to see a building of a railway line anywhere in the world. But it's interesting because because these metals are being excavated by my government and sold to scrap dealers. Most of them are Indian companies, unfortunately. But because in Ghana, we have a lot of Indians living in Ghana, and they are into big businesses, steel and other things. So whilst I, as an artist, I'm trying to intervene to buy these materials which have witnessed history and all that, and then relaying them. But this time, as we're relaying them, we're excavating new imaginary forms within this generation that is yet to emerge. So it also included trains, for instance, even German trains that were built in the GDR period. And a lot of these were used for mining and other things. But I was also thinking a lot about what it meant. So some of these trains had been cut into several pieces, and I had to buy them from the scrap dealers and then look for the people who had cut them into pieces and pay them so we could weld the train back together again, because I was also reliant on their memory of where these objects were coming from and the significance of these objects. So now, taking it out of, taking it back to this place where historical labors were taken from, kids witnessing these forms differently, because most often, a lot of us don't go to construction sites. When the modern art museums are being built, it's only the construction workers who get to see these. And even that, there is no criticality with regards to the labor that goes into building. But for us in art, at least within our generation coming from Ghana, we do acknowledge that it's very important to be able to connect this through the work that we do. So, again, you see that there are different activities. Kids just visiting the studio, seeing collections, playing. And sometimes people say, oh, but yes, it's because the kids in the north, because they're villagers, they've never seen a rail line before. But I'm like, yeah, but we have white kids who also visit the space, and they're also equally excited. Because culture is a fundamental thing, because they might be able to do that in the village in Ghana, but maybe in Europe they can't do that. So it's also a matter of creating a space for experiencing the world. So this image always reminds me of when this happened in the studio. It reminded me of all the videos I see of the Indian trains with where you never see the train and just people. Yeah. But it's just a point to make that at the end of the day, it's also about the fact that we're thinking about culture, which is a basic thing, which through art and even through a precarious way that we produce art, we're able to somehow redisseminate forms differently. And the train, of course, the train without an engine which moves. So looking back to the original image where the men are building a railway line, more than a century later, we're bringing back these technological forms, even without the engine. So again, what does it mean to be able to re-engage with these kinds of labor? Again, from a more critical point of view, you can see that sometimes even the kids are playing. So it's a dense, serious matter that we're playing with, but art is not really meant to be that way. If not, then we might as well just read textbooks and all that. I'm really interested in how it opens up. So I'm also interested in how it opens up in architectural form. So this is still within the studio, but the idea that even as we're constructing spaces, we're using those spaces, and labor together with both physical, material, intellectual labor, all these things come together through, for instance, various activities that we engage within the studio. And that also inspires building of spaces. So this is a greenhouse within the studio. So it's an open space, columns, all made with bricks. And the idea that we're also, the idea of repair, we're repairing the soil because mostly chemical fertilizers. So we just have to put cow dung into the soil, let the grass grow, we cut it, we mix it with the soil for more than a year, even before we even think about the idea of, for instance, engaging in revisiting the idea of an extinct spice or flower or whatever it is. So for me, all these things are very important. How do we engage this, how do we engage the next generation is a very important thing. So in some cases also, you realize that it also takes us into this realm of, as I said before, archaeological material. So engaging even with pottery, things that have historical forms, that even by way that we change, orientation, because they are pots, but by turning it upside down, it almost looks like we're in a dinosaur layer, like dinosaur X, something like that. So I really like the idea that even modern historical forms that are neglected, when we pay attention and then we reorient them, it can take us even prehistory, because we're looking at the idea of life and not just the idea of this human-centric form. And when the railway was being built, a lot of timber was cut through rainforests in order to build to make the railway sleepers and others, but others were used in making furniture. So in Ghana, I also go around villages and I collect the last remaining furnitures that are, because it's in the villages that you find these things. And through that, in the studio, we engage in this act of repair where we bring them back to life and we use them in the library. So when kids are engaging with them, they also understand that the material or the furniture that they're sitting in is also a historical material that is actually tied to the environment historically and all that. And this is the last image. And it's important because I was talking about ideological repair because that was one of the things that colonialism did a lot. It really went deep down in a way that people thought about their sense of responsibility to the community or to the world around them. And for us in Ghana, it's very important, at least spreading it to the rest of the world, that as we think about our work as cultural practitioners, our work only matters because it actually has a power to influence another generation, not just within our time, but time that we cannot even imagine or comprehend. So when we have kids now who can come to, let's say, an artist studio or a cultural institution, and they can become custodians or guides, even as their kids, to other kids through technological forms, gramophones, things that normally maybe as an artist, when I was growing up, I never saw any of these things, never had access to archives and all that. So the question is that, how do we restore memory that we once never had? And again, how does our life's work become the non-reciprocal gift, if it makes any sense? So thank you very much.